Season 3 of Battlefield 6 came with a ton of fixes and balance changes to vehicles, gadgets, and gunplay, which seemed fine on paper, but after getting a look at these changes firsthand, I personally have some mixed feelings about them. While I do think that DICE is taking a step in the right direction with this season, I feel that there are a few things that have ended up impacting gameplay in a negative way. So let's get straight into it, starting with some of the more impactful gameplay changes. I'll just be completely honest. I think the recoil changes they made are just lazy, and the devs took the easy way out to try avoiding the skill gap that comes with adding actual spread to weapons in the game. I personally didn't mind the random recoil before the Season 3 update. I think it did a good enough job at balancing some weapons at range like the VCR or the M4, but the real problem is how little spread the weapons have in BF6. The problem with random recoil is that it can't be controlled. Unlike predetermined recoil patterns that players can learn and counteract, random recoil is unpredictable and pretty much impossible to control or counter. It does help reduce engagement distances, but like I said, it's impossible to counter, unlike bullet spread, where you can tap fire or burst fire in longer range gunfights, which introduces a skill gap where players have to learn how spread works on different weapons and how to properly counteract it. In my opinion, they need to revert the change or just remove random recoil entirely and introduce actual bullet spread. It makes sense to reduce engagement distances on specialized close-range weapons like the SEW, the VCR, and the TR7, but these changes have also affected specialized mid to long-range weapons like the M123K and the B36, which just makes long-range gunfights harder for no reason. And speaking of the SEW, it still beams up to 30 or 40 meters, as well as other SMGs like the MP5 and the SL9. And they left the DRS completely untouched, which just makes it even more viable and overpowered at any range. I'm personally not complaining, but from a gameplay perspective, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. The point of this change was to make weapons more attractive to use, as they said in the patch notes, but the DRS is by far the most used LMG in the game, with an estimated 10% pick rate, which doesn't sound like much, but all the other weapon pick rates in the game range from 0.1% to 7.2%, which just shows how popular the DRS is in the game, and I can see the pick rate going up even more after this update. And I'm not saying the game doesn't need some fine-tuning to the gunplay, I'm just saying they're kinda doing it in the wrong way. Now we're moving on to the vehicle changes, and as an infantry-only player, I don't have the experience to go in-depth with the changes. So if you're a vehicle player in BF6, you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. But I personally think it's definitely a step in the right direction. I already know that the changes to passive health regen and improving the predictability of damage on vehicles is going to be appreciated by a lot of vehicle players. But as an infantry-only player, I think that increasing the number of rockets to destroy a vehicle was a bit unnecessary. Changing the angle damage model is already more than enough, since this just makes it harder to deal max damage to the sides or rear of vehicles, but increasing the number of rockets required to destroy vehicles is kind of overkill in my opinion. While this was a much needed change, I didn't think it would be very impactful, but vehicles are definitely more menacing after the update. While I was playing the other day, I noticed that some enemy vehicle players were running around in the same tanks they spawned in the beginning of the match. I was even getting alt-capped on escalation on Gallman, and when I looked at the map, there was an enemy vehicle on 4 different objectives, and the engineers on my team were doing little to nothing to get rid of those vehicles. I know that it may seem that I just want these changes reverted, or that I want vehicles to be nerfed, but I really do think that 99% of these changes were necessary to make vehicles more viable. But the way I see it, they ended up indirectly nerfing the engineers' effectiveness against vehicles, on top of the changes they made to the damage output of engineer gadgets. I think all they really need to do to counteract this is to do some more fine-tuning to the angle damage model on vehicles and the damage output of engineer gadgets. But like I said, if you disagree, or you have more thoughts about the changes, let me know in the comments. Next up is going to be the changes made to audio and netcode. I personally think the audio is a lot better now. I found myself reacting to footstep audio and slide audio way more than I did before the update. But I do have to say that the directionality of footsteps is still hard to read at times. And under certain circumstances, I don't hear people until they're about 3 steps away from me. But I feel that it's finally in a good spot after 7 months and multiple audio fixes. I do think that adding dry fire audio was kind of unnecessary and a waste of resources, as well as some other things in the update, but I'll talk more about that later. When it comes to the issues with netcode and desync, some things feel better, and some things feel just as bad, if not worse than how it felt in the 1.2.3 update. When it comes to dying around corners, it definitely feels worse than it did before the Season 3 update. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt when it came to desync, but there were more than a few times where I ended up dying while ducking or running behind cover. and it's honestly really frustrating that this is still an issue after 7 months and multiple attempted fixes. As for 1v1 gunfights, the netcode does feel noticeably better, but there were still more than a few instances where my bullets weren't recognized on the server side of things. And before I get into the new weapons in Galmud Railway, I wanted to go over some unnecessary additions, that being things like operator bios, dry fire audio, bespoke animations, as they say in the patch notes, and other things they added. Personally, I do think that adding operator bios adds a nice bit of lore to the game, but I think they could have split these resources to add an air radar, fix the artifacting issues with some in-game elements, and further improving netcode and audio. And finally, we can go over the new map and weapons. I personally think these are all great additions to the game. I think that Galmud plays pretty well in Escalation and Breakthrough. When it comes to Escalation, I feel that it's pretty infantry friendly. There's a lot of natural cover like rocks, hills, and foliage to help infantry players traverse the map, and I personally like the flow of the gameplay in the more dense town area at the top of the map. I also think that it plays pretty well in Breakthrough. I don't have a whole lot of experience yet, but it seems that none of the sectors are very hard to attack or defend because of the map's natural cover. Unlike the 4th sector in Contaminated, or the 2nd sector in Hagental Base that are just huge open areas that don't have a lot of meaningful cover, and you can be seen at almost any angle. But only time will tell how well this map will fit in when more players learn how to play on it. As for the weapons, I really only have experience with the L115 so far. With that being said, I was kind of underwhelmed. It seems that they were learning from their mistakes with the bullet velocity, but they still decided to double down on the sweet spot mechanic. It has a maximum bullet velocity of 880 meters per second, which I'm pretty sure is the slowest of all sniper rifles, which is slightly more aligned with past snipers in other games. But the sweet spot is the largest of all snipers, ranging from 120 meters to 175 meters, which fits right in between the M2010s and the PSR's maximum sweet spot ranges. I think that the L115 is just weirdly balanced overall. It has elements that make it really powerful at farther ranges, but there are also elements that make it more viable at closer ranges. But overall, it's a good addition to the snipers. And while I haven't gotten the chance to use the M16 or the RPK-74M, I've heard that the M16 is really good, and the RPK is pretty lackluster. I haven't seen any complaints about the M16. It obviously isn't the strongest choice in close to mid-range engagements, but it can certainly hold its own against the majority of weapons in the game. As for the new RPK, I just don't know what they were thinking. It's pretty much the AK-205, but worse. It has a slower fire rate, and its damage model and handling are worse than the AK-205. But like I said, we're only a few days into Season 3, so only time will tell how Galmud and the new weapons will pan out later into the season. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot more to say. I'm glad they shortened the season by removing the 3rd month in the cycle. Hopefully this means that they're ahead of schedule in some way, shape, or form, and that this game will be in the place it's meant to be in sooner rather than later. I'm pretty excited to try out the PP19 Vityaz, as well as Cairo Bazaar, and I hope they bring operations back with Siege of Cairo and Cairo Bazaar. And I'm pretty excited to try out the attachments that come out later this season, like the Cryogenic Barrel and the Subsonic Ammo. I can already see there being some pretty crazy builds using those attachments. I also didn't mention the new attachments that are already in the game because I didn't think there was a good time to really, but I think that the new aftermarket buffer is definitely a good addition to the game. While it doesn't go straight after the intensity of recoil on weapons, I do think that removing visual recoil helps visualize and counter the random recoil as best as possible. But it does suck that it's not available on all weapons. I feel that it would be pretty useful on weapons like the M433 and the M123K, so hopefully they add it to a few more weapons in the future, but I'm not counting on that happening. All in all, it definitely seems like the devs finally have an understanding of what the player base wants out of this game, so hopefully we'll see even more impactful changes in the future. With all that out of the way, if you enjoy the video and you're new to the channel, consider liking the video and subscribing. I'll be going over weapon builds for the new and existing weapons in the game, breakdowns, and helpful tips that'll keep you up to date on all things Battlefield 6. I also livestream multiple times a week on this channel and on Twitch, so drop a follow over there as well. And if you want to know what weapon setups people are using but you don't want to waste time watching endless videos, you should join my Discord where I post all the best weapon builds for the weapons in BF6. You could also tag along with me in-game, or if you're looking for a squad in Red Sect Ranked, if you even play that at least. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.